My name is Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today, our guest is Tashi Dekyid Monet, a Tibetan scholar, writer, and translator. Tashi grew up in the Eastern Tibetan Highlands, in the rhythms of nomadic and agricultural life, where time is measured by light and shadow, where songs carry cosmological wisdom, and where knowing the face of the land means being woven into a web of reciprocal relationships with all four realms of beings. Through explorations of oral tradition, sacred geography, spiritual songs, and the concept of tendrel or auspicious connection, Tashi offers insights into ways of knowing that nurture belonging, protect sacred knowledge, and recognize land itself as a teacher. First of all, thank you, Tashi, for meeting. And it would be wonderful to ground our conversation in your home place, because that's been a huge influence and focus of your research. Will you speak about where you grew up and the prominent rhythms of your days and years?
First of all, I'm very happy that we are able to find a time and meet across the ocean. I would love to share a bit about my home place. It's part of the sixth grade mountain range in Eastern Tibet, Dongkham in Tibetan. So one of them is called Minya Rabgang, which is the Great Minya mountain ranges. And I grew up in a semi-nomadic community. That means we have both fields to farm, where we grow barley, potatoes, and a few other vegetables. And then we also have animals to herd. So we had horses, sheep, and parts of the family goes up to the mountains in the summer. And winter months, we all stay together in the house in the valley. We have different pastures that you move through the seasons, spring, summer, fall, back to the house in the winter. So I grew up in that kind of community, and it's a very small community. The summer pasture is really high up in the mountain, and once you are on top of that, you can see all directions, and you see many of our sacred mountains, like Minya Pankaro and Minya Japtahatsi. These are our, what I call territorial sovereigns. These are the rulers, protectors of our region, and they're called Shibda in Tibetan, or they're a type of land-based spirit, like Nyen or Ha, different names. In the mountains, we live in black Yafo tent, Dana, which in our dialect called the Bah. Yeah, so I was with my family in the community until I was 11 years old, and then I went to schools. Eventually, I was able to go to Central University for Minorities in Beijing. In 2024, I finished my doctoral degree in education at University of Virginia, and where I did my dissertation that we're going to talk about today. Working through my dissertation, I was able to look back and see what I experienced and learned is a form of education, because often we don't see those experiences growing up in a village, in a community that is full of learning and culture and education. These often we don't see as a forms of education, because education we think is happening only in schools and monasteries. So I was doing this dissertation project and reflecting on what it means to be educated, how we learn, and with whom and from whom. So those kind of questions really enabled me to rethink and appreciate what I went through in our village, in our community, with all the lives and the culture and the ceremonies in village is a form of education. In my dissertation, I talk about literacies of land, which is a way of understanding, relating to all the other lives around you. So, one example could be the seasonal change, which is a way of understanding time. We understand these days we have clock time, calendar time, all that kind of written time or technological times. But the seasonal change time is a dynamic process, and you see and experience and learn about them not only like cognitively, but like experientially and also embodied way. For example, in our community, like what kind of animals and which flowers signals what time of the year is. We have this flower called which can be translated as the calf herder flower. It comes up first in the spring, and it signals the start of the spring, but also the time during which the yak calves are born. And another bird called the nele in written kind of classical Tibetan, but also we call holikama, which comes in the spring. That also signals a time, the springtime. And as a kids, we were taught to observe what part of the bird you see first. If you see its back, that means you have a good year in terms of shelter, clothing. If you see his stomach or her stomach, it signals that you have a good harvest and food production, things like that. It sounds simple and naive, maybe, but it's really trains your attention to the changes and the dynamics of the life, the actual world moving like the earth is turning, right? I think this is really powerful learning process and teaching and training our attentions and hearts to see the life process of the land. The light and shadow is also a kind of form of time of how we actually recognize the face of the land or the valley. I'm sure other cultures do that too, but you follow the morning light, sunlight coming in first when the light hits the peak of the mountain very early morning. And then you can follow that light. In our valley, there's a river. Once the light comes down to the river, the morning is done. And then in the evening, you will follow the shadow on the other side. We're told, once the shadow is on this mountain, on this valley, you go get the yaks and things like that. It's an example of how children or even like adults are being observant of the change on the land, even the stars in a single day.
I would love to go through some of the aspects of being in relationship with land through these three levels that you speak of in your work, the outer, inner, and secret. I guess we can begin with the outer, and it goes back to something you were sharing a moment ago, knowing the face of the land. And you talk about the need to know the land and the people indivisible, and to know the essence, the face of all of these parts, the people, land, deities, spirits. You also say that if someone feels disconnected or disoriented, they may say they don't know these faces. So let's begin then with knowing the face of these beings and place. What does this mean?
So I was taking that from a Tibetan way of talking about place, like knowing the face of the land. We say Sango Shiba, which appears a lot in Gesar epic stories. Gesar epic is supposed to be the longest epic in the world. The dialogues and conversations between characters are mostly based in songs. So the songs begin with, if you don't know the face of this land, they'll tell whole history of the land. Then they'll say, if you don't know the face of the deity, and then they'll go on finally to know if you don't know the face of this person, and then they will introduce themselves. So I was taking from that, but also it's used a lot in Tibetan ways to describe someone's knowledge of place. If someone don't know the place or they feel really, as you say, disoriented and out of place, and they'll say, I don't know the face of this land, these people or the deities, that really means you are completely lost. You are in a foreign place. That's where the phrase come from, knowing the face of the land. I was also drawing a lot from indigenous studies literature here. They talk about literacies of land or land literacies. In my dissertation, in the outer chapter, the outer layer of the life world of Tibetan land education, I talk about the ways that we understand, recognize, and relate to to the land and all the beings that part of the land. And then this is a process of observable, empirical, experiential process. I was sharing early on about the observing the seasonal change, the relationship between the plants and animals and the community.
Going back to this piece of knowing the face of the land and knowing these different aspects, right? Not necessarily even just the land, but also the deities and the animals and other beings. And will you also just talk about land and belonging? What happens when we're tethered to the land by so many points, such as these?
One thing I really came to understand is being away from my homeland, the valley, the mountains I grew up in, is I feel like that my myself is extended throughout the land. As I move away from the land, you started to feel there is a separation and also a sense of one being smaller and shrinking as you move away. And also, that's a felt sense. I'm still processing what that means. But I really think the reason that I felt part of the land is that you know the place so well and you were able to read the messages and the signs and the change. And there's like a communication happening between the plants and the animals or the seasonal change. In this outer layer, I was working with a lot of Tibetan creation songs. This category was called Sibanjila, which was like a question and answer song asking about the creation of the land or primordial existence of the universe or the place. Those songs are really informative about how we understand the relationships between plants and animals, and also riddles and many other arts of speech that are used for kids to learn things about plants and stars, all sorts of things. There's a lot of numerical learning too,
Mm.
like what are the nine wonders of the world? Then you have to list the nine. And then in science teaching how to read the signs of the water, how to read the bubbles in a stream. And if the bubbles doing this, that means the rain will come later, or how to look at fog, where fogs move, and certain forms of fog tells what kind of weather will happen later. Parents or elders tell you observe this and that something will happen, you have to do this, you have to collect the dried berries, but also through songs.
You were sharing in your dissertation about the herbal plant Nyalo, the way that plants and community activities overlap. You see a plant in a certain way, and then okay, like what you're saying, it's time for spring or time for some particular activity agriculturally. Do you want to read the song you were going to share? Then we
Uh,
can have an example of the wisdom of songs and like how they're used in Tibetan culture.
I'll share this. It's called Hey Fellows. It's a very simple song. Maybe I'll first read. I could also try to sing a little bit. Let's see
That
if
would
my
be.
voice works out. Then I'll just sing one section. So go I wanna come do body arona da so can bao cứ kawa kar body arona da nyuna so lu da wa ya cứ je mare arona da nyuna từ dân the sao chu ken la je arona da nyuna. So that's just one section of the song. So this is most likely a folk song, but it's sung by Dubé. He was a very well-known Tibetan singer. So this song identifies three foundations of good life. The first one observes the sky. It's very simple. It says the color of the sky is blue and the snow which descends from it is white, and the foundation of good month and years always offer juniper smoke to that sky. So that is recognizing the sky, and the gift comes from sky, snow here, and then that's foundations of good month and years, meaning that perceptions for all the plants and lives on Earth. And then we also have obligations to reciprocate what the sky is offering to us. One way is to offer juniper smoke to that sky. The next one is the wool of young female yak is black, and the milk from them is white, nurturing nomads' lives in black tent. Please always care for them. So that's for nomadic family. This is again recognizing what the yak is, their color, the milk they provide, and these are nurturing nomads' lives, Tibetan lives. And then we have to reciprocate, which is giving back, hurting them, care for them. And the next one is recognizing spiritual teachers. The robe of super spiritual teacher is yellow, and what they teach is sacred truth, lamp illuminating our path of this life and next. Always recite prayers to them. That's very self-explanatory, so I won't go into that. It's very simple words, but also very essential and fundamental to all the lives on the plateau. This is very similar to the songs I was talking about, the creation songs.
This actually is a perfect segue into the inner, because you say that a central intention of Indigenous or ancestral education is to place attention on interdependency amongst all beings, humans, non human spirits. And you
Mhm.
also say seasonal patterns and systems like landscapes. You give the example of this with the relationship that the Tibetan Buddhist yogi and poet Shabkar Rongjul had with what is considered to be the most sacred mountain in Tibet, Machen Gangri. You also speak of his relationship with the king, Machen Riwo of Machen, and
Mhm.
how this relationship is essential for his realization or understanding of the nature of reality. What's going on to allow realization or enlightenment to dawn through reciprocity with the mountain, with the king?
He has collections of spiritual songs, gur. These are songs he used to express his realization, but also to teach not only human beings, but also animals and plants. He is Tibetan meditator, pilgrim, a singer, and he is early 19th century yogi. In his autobiography, he wrote about his experiences being in different secret mountains and valleys throughout Tibet. And one particular one I was focusing on in my dissertation is Machin Gari. Is also Anyu Machin, which is very famous secret mountain and also territorial sovereign in eastern Tibet. He was there meditating for a few months. So Anyu Machin is also one of the 8 sons that are the ancestral mountains. There is 9 of them, and he is one of the 8 sons and their father. Together, they constitute the 9 primordial mountain gods, or La. Through Shabkar and his engagement at Anyu Machin, throughout Tibetan plateau, the mountains are connected in kinship relationships. And we also call these mountains as Amni, which is grandfather. So we remember them as grandfathers and grandmothers too. That is where I'm looking at the kind of inner layer of the mountains. Outer layer is where we see and feel the beauty and the gift they provide. But inner part is how they are related to Tibetan cosmology, ontology too, like what it means to be a person or what it means to be a mountain. And for our communities, the Shibda Mountains is pre-Buddhist understandings. These mountains are the rulers and protectors of the region, and they are translated in English as mountain gods or deities. Each village has their own altars and their own mountain sovereigns. These smaller local mountain sovereigns are also part of the larger retinues of the larger mountains. Others are translating now as owners of the local land. I'm doing as territorial sovereigns. Sovereign means kings and rulers and also protectors of the place. There's a like complex relationships to explore, but let's just focus on Jabgar and Amnimachin. So Jabgar was there for several months. So I was reading his songs and his writings about his experience of being there. I noticed the kind of the similar gradual process of recognizing the land, outer to inner, because many of his earlier songs are about observation of the outer land, where he's noticing the relationships between the wildlife there, the bees, the animals there, And later, as he was there for longer, he was able to communicate with the Machin Bonra, which is the territorial sovereign that lives in Machin Rule, the mountain. And he had a exchange visits through dream, but also experiential realizations. I won't know what it's like, but it's a way of experiencing the different layers that Shabkar was able to do. The other way I was really struck by is how many of his realizations, the deepest realizations, happened there when he was meditating at the peaks of mountains on this Anyamachin mountain range. Also noticing how he was able to articulate his realization through landscape, through the language of land, the clouds, the sky, the openness of the sky, the no boundaries between the inner, outer, or material. My argument is this is because of this, where he is, and obviously the sacredness of the land, but also the land itself as a material being is enabling what Shabkar was able to see and experience. I was
Yeah.
stressing the impacts of land and landscape ecologies on our understandings, emotions, even language, the way we can articulate something, deep emotions through landscapes, the movement of clouds and sky. And those give us the language and images and things to be able to see how we feel and experience something deep.
The relationship of Shabkar and Machen Gangri. Also, what struck me was that not only is Shabkar praising the mountain and making offerings like song offerings, but Shabkar is also receiving in response messages from the mountain in terms of like rainbows, or when the king felt there was this true offering, this true appreciation for Machen Gangri, that then in return the mountain has their own way of communicating. And that was also really touching, the expression of that and the display of that.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. I was very struck by that too. At the very beginning of their meeting, when he saw the mountain, he made offerings of juniper smoke, sun, and then he was so prostrated. And in return, there's a rain of flowers, but also thunders in the mountain, welcoming his presence there. It's beginning a very auspicious encounter. And then later, especially one occasion was he composed a poem to praise the mountain and Machin Bomrat, the deity or the territorial sovereign in the mountain. And on the day he did that, at that night, he received a dream. Through his dream, he was able to meet the king, which is the territorial sovereign, the Machimbamra, and Japro was invited to his kingdom and he was put on the throne next to him. He was given the kata, the ceremonial scarves, and maybe even a hat. I don't remember. But Amyamachin told his future he will be the singer of the land of snows. This was the beginning of his wandering throughout Tibet. So he indeed sung many songs later, and also promised that there was a kind of a commitment between the mountain and the Shabkar that I'll protect you. And the mountain also expressed his wishes for Shabkar to continue what he was doing.
So you also write then about this interdependency amongst these different categories of beings, as you're speaking of here, the me human, and then the Nyen terrestrial, and then the Lu, the La, these four realms, and how our oral or ancestral literacy plays a part in keeping harmony between these realms. You're speaking about it with this kind of protection between Shabkar and the mountain, but how do these realms support each other? And like, why is this so relevant?
So this is Tibetan cosmology and ontology of what the world is and how we as human beings are part of this web of relationships. And as you mentioned, there's different categories, but also different layers of the realm. Like class show beings are upper realm, and then we have the middle kind of Nien realm. These are mountain deities, and also other beings there. And then we have Lu, which is aquatic serpent beings, spirits. In terms of their interdependency, they each seem to have their own places they are part of and protecting. And Lu beings can be very fearsome if pollute water or cut a tree. They're also connected to trees. People get illness. There are certain activities you can do or cannot do. And the Jibda Mountains are also very fierce. The exchange between humans and these mountains are also very reciprocal, and human make offerings. We sing songs, say poems to them. And then every year there's a certain times that people go to the altars of these mountains to make offerings. And if you miss those, negative consequence could come. And also, I remember that our family making observations of how weather has changed after the community went to make offering to the mountain. And if something goes wrong, also there could be hailstorms and negative consequences such as that. So these relationships are not always harmonious. There's a certain way of balance in keeping these relationships in harmony. That's where I think the traditions and ancestral knowledge and experience comes to teach older generation to the next generation. That's the importance of continuation of indigenous education, these place-based traditions, because that is not something we can just learn, research it upon, and apply in this context.
Something I really appreciate about this view of the interdependency amongst these realms is being aware of how we're impacting them. Even if we don't see the celestial realm or don't see the Lu, or those of us that don't have the capacity to see them, I guess I should say, still turning our attention towards the fact that there's also beings beyond what we see and that we have to care for beyond our human realms.
That's where the education, the importance of indigenous knowledge, the transmission of that knowledge comes in terms of how we understand these relationships, how we know and trust the kind of education we now are receiving in schools. And in the modern times, we are losing certain ways of seeing and knowing the world. And then we think that those are not visible, don't exist. The other aspect is in the communities, certain people do have access to this and can enter into these relationships. And there is also aspect of respect and trust in those people who can access and who have that knowledge. So community and trust and relationships that are long term and that are also tested too. This is not just blind trust in some figure who says, I see something and there is something, right? There are processes of credibility and understandings.
So let's then delve into the secret layer of relating with land. Will you talk about the secret dimension of land and these concepts of earth as blissful lands and also sacred bodies only visible to those with certain capacities?
Yeah. So this framework, I should say, come from traditional Tibetan epistemological or ontological framework that the reality is known in outer inner secret layers. And even biographies of people has the outer inner secret biographies. So this framework is pretty common Buddhist and I think also Bombo framework. In the secret aspect of land and land education, I am drawing from the literatures on Ne, which is translated as a secret landscape or secret sites. Ne itself means to exist, also a place where some power or energy or spirit dwells. That is about the land being sacred and divine. And there are different ways to understand what is a secret site. One is that these ne, or the secret place of power, can be primordial or something that formed later through actions of teachers, spiritual figures who meditate, who did some spiritual activity or in that particular spot. Through that, power and blessings transfer to the landscape. So that's how the place become sites of power. But the primordial part, I draw from Kongzhi Yonde Gyamtso's work on Ne, and he has compiled many texts on Ne, guidelines for engaging places or encountering places of power. And he theorizes and conceptualizes what Ne is and how they are connected to our bodies as also having different layers, like the subtle body, where our bodies are made of energy channels, and Tili, which also can be divine beings, and the flow of them. So those ways of understanding our physical body, and the same way that the place also have channels where the divine bodies and sacredness also flow, but certain places are a gateway or door to be able to experience, access these powers. So that's how secretness and also sacredness of the place, this is a layer only certain people be able to see and experience, or even maybe articulate what it is. That's rough description of what this secret aspect of it. I was interested in using that framework as a logic for protecting certain aspects of knowledge, protecting against extractive research. Also, the idea of practice refusal, as other indigenous scholars articulated, research and education itself has done a lot of harm to indigenous communities and their ways of knowing their world, land, etc. So I was really focused on this aspect on how Tibetan scholars and writers conceal or protect certain aspects of knowing. And also there is a need and logic that will respect the knowledge that communities hold, and some are for themselves and they're internal to the communities.
So, what I'm understanding too is that if some of these qualities of land are not visible to many people, you don't have certain capacities, whether it's like spiritual capacities or a certain relationship, a certain amount of merit, or with a certain landscape or beings, then you won't have a relationship or you won't have access, you won't have visibility. So, in that way alone, it protects people that might have exploitative intentions to be able to even relate to this landscape.
Yeah. And also recognizing the agency of the land and also the relational aspect of knowledge and knowing, the same as our relationships between, like, for example, say a researcher and a participant in the research, the level of relationship you have, deeper, better relationship, better, more ethical understandings come out of that. And then I think the relationship between places and people, all different aspects of the land, of the secret, the divinity, has to come through relationships. It's not something you could access immediately. Knowledge is always incomplete. And ways of knowing and the way we know is a process. It's not a complete one, especially when we truly recognize the sacredness and also the agency of the land and these beings, and we truly see these relationships. And also, there is no need to know the complete aspect of our being or the universe, unlike what kind of the modern logics of knowledge creation or production. We have to know more, or we have to know the complete aspect of something.
Let's talk about tendril. What is the meaning of tendril and how to cultivate it? And you also talk about the logic of it. Feels
Yeah.
like it obviously ties everything together in many ways.
Yeah, so this is something I've been continue to explore. Tendril, the Buddhist aspect of tendril, its interdependent origin. I think that was the translation of tendril. It seems the etymology of tendril is actually from Buddhist origin, introduced to Tibetan context. But tendril had evolved and had different meanings in Tibetan context. The one I engage is everyday Tibetan understandings of tendrel, which is very close to Tashi and yang. Those are different concepts. Tashi is auspiciousness, yang is kind of essence of fortune or essence of being, vitality. Longta too, it's also an understanding of power and vitality. So tendril here has meaning of a sign, auspicious sign, or could be also be omens too, bad omens. So the way I engage is like how certain aspect of the land, for example, the arrival of certain birds. One example is the way that magpies sing tells certain information about what's about to happen. So this is understanding the nature or the land through these different relationships, and that brings certain message to communities. That's one way. And the other is Tibetan observations of time and respect for time, particularly beginnings of time. For example, the Losar, the New Year, the days of New Year is very auspicious days, and you only do certain things that day. You don't speak ill of people or don't say bad words and do certain actions to cultivate good connections, fortunate connections, that are at the beginning of the new year, a seasonal cycle. You do this and a certain good relationships or follow connections or form. That's the tendril. But also when people meet, they greet certain ways to create good connections later, like offering of the kata, the ceremonial scarves is a way of cultivating tendril. I am exploring more recently is songs, how songs of tendril identifies certain aspects of Tibetan life as fundamental structures of good life. So tendril sometimes gathers, and you can also arrange tendrils, these relationships. And it seems like the ability to recognize and revere, witness these relationships and connection coming together is very important aspect of the danger, which I think I'm talking about the logics of it. You need to be able to see that these things are happening. And then once you see, you do something to observe, to respect, to create. And one is like singing songs or making offerings. And then there is also a lot of, as I was talking earlier, like the capacity to trust, trust in the agency of the other relationships. It's not only the human relationships that create the fortunate circumstance or connections for our lives, but there are other beings, other lives, animals, land itself. We all depend on Mother Earth, right? Ways of recognizing good moments coming together is through the change, the dynamic relationships that you see in the living world. And the ability to recognize also comes from community or indigenous education. If you don't have the knowledge and the ways to relate or see certain aspect relationships between the outer world or yourself, you won't be able to recognize these. In my writing, and also Tibetan songs and literature, creative work, especially like oral traditions, recognize the abundant life and the beauty, the joy, and the liveness of our homeland. So this is a very unique way to understanding our land and ways to see it. Because as you may have seen, Tibetan landscape is often described as a fragile, as barren, as a wasteland, as difficult land, because outsiders assume how difficult it is to live in Tibetan land. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but people has deep relationships, understandings, and actually seeing and being with this land really see the beauty and the abundant life in there. So this next song is called An Exquisite Abundance. Gong la ni ngo mo ga la pa yoro ye la chang sororo Nang la ni du ja dong la ta yun zo ba ya mo ro ro cha chi la ta ra la ze ri zo mo ya la ro ro nang la ni du ja zhen dang zhe yo ro ye la chang so ro ro Cham la ni se sa ma ho ma he ka yon zo ba ya mo ro ro tra si la ta ra la se ri zo mo ya la ro ro it has two sections. That's the first section. It's actually a sound for offering chant, alcohol. No, I read English. The blue sky is pitched as a tent. Oh, friend, please enjoy some wine. 100 thunder beams are tethered inside. What an exquisite abundance. Oh, auspicious divine banner and long living ocean. Those are the names of people. The thunder beams are cared for as if female yaks. Oh, friend, please enjoy some wine. At home, the golden pail is filled with milk. What an exquisite abundance. And oh, auspicious divine banner and long living ocean. That's the first section. This earthly round is encircled in castles. Oh, friend, please enjoy some wine. The four-sided field summons fortune. What an exquisite abundance. O auspicious divine banner and long living ocean, the four-sided fields are cared for as wealth. Friend, please enjoy some wine. Inside, the granary overflows with grains. What an exquisite abundance. O auspicious divine banner and long living ocean. My hypothesis is that this is a song seen at a wedding. The first name, auspicious divine banner, it's a male name, and Sirin Tomo, long living ocean, is a female name. And so it's a gathering of relationships for a wedding. So recognizing how the land from sky to the thunder beams, the land itself, the mountains as castles and fields. So it's really recognition of abundance and fortunate connections and relationships coming together.
Before we close, is there anything that you want to share that we didn't cover? Anything you want to say?
One thing in my mind is how to teach these land-based ways of being to the next generations of Tibetans, especially those in exile. I have a son, 5-year-old son, growing outside of Tibetan land. And often we are in places where we don't recognize the face of the land. For me, Turtle Island, or what is known as US, is foreign to me, the landscape, the ecologies. So I'm really thinking a lot about how to educate Tibetan children outside of Tibetan land, but of course back home too. And also there's the aspect of ethical relationship with the indigenous communities here. Teaching Tibetan children, son too, about the places here, have them be able to experience the dynamic relationship in the land that we are in is very important. And it's a opportunity to also build better relationships in the place we are to the communities. I feel like it's impossible just learn through words and stories. They are powerful, but physically they need to experience learning from the land. And often we think that these lands are completely colonized and native communities are largely absent. But there are a lot of communities, and I think in every place there are native communities. And so, yeah, I'm really hoping to build relationship. So in the end, I'll conclude with a prayer, auspicious conclusion. I'll read Tibetan and then English. First three lines are coming from traditional songs that are marked as auspicious songs by women. And then last few lines I have composed myself later when I was writing for the dissertation. So first three lines are traditional. Drango ma kine donglandi da yuma ta tong ndroglayo yang kendang mander da shisho. Njengoma juni zilandi ndejuma tatong yanglayo yang kendang matter dashisho. Jongoma jini namlandi jongjuma tatong wodnayo yang kendang matter dashisho. Me koma shakne halandi wojuma tatong yurnayo yang kendang matter dashisho. So that's the Tibetan part. Now I read English. Earlier horses marched and mingled with wild horses, while later horses yet remain on the pasture. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier yaks have marched and mingled with the wild yaks, while later yaks yet remain on the pasture. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier sheep have marched and mingled with the Goa gazelle, while later sheep yet remain on the pasture. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier glaciers have melted and absorbed with the expanse, while later glaciers yet remain on the mountains. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier rivers have flowed and mingled with the fog, while later rivers yet remain in the valleys. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of the fortune. Earlier black tents have left and mingled with stories, while later black tents yet remain on the nomadic pastures. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier grains modified mingled with chemicals, while later grains yet remain in the field. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier stories have left mingled with the sky, while later stories yet remain in Tibet. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune. Earlier ancestors have departed and mingled with the La, while later Tibetans yet remain on our homeland. May life be auspicious, never separate from this essence of fortune.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation with Tashi, you may also enjoy a past conversation with Drukmo Gyal. Drukmo, born into a Tibetan family of spiritual practitioners who integrate meditation, ritual, and retreat with raising families, farming, and community life, shares stories of her grandfather's dedication to spiritual life, her grandmother's fearless teachings, and her own journey slowing down in a world demanding more. Drukmo reveals how ancient practices of body, speech, and mind offer pathways to find harmony in our fragmented times. To listen to this episode, you can find the link in the show notes.